Hello, this is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer of Community Culture Showcase, and welcome. So I asked my audience, is it hot enough yet? Wow, what a summer, right? 90, 99 degrees. We are floating with that, but look forward, after Labor Day, things should cool down. And when it cools down, the artists come out of the woodwork. Literally. And we have all these wonderful, wonderful art shows. As many of you who have watched my show know, we here at the Art Studio, we have a gallery right here in our TV studio, and we have wonderful art shows several times a year. So coming up in November, we'll have our next art show. So keep an eye. We have wonderful artists from all over the community. This is the only nonprofit gallery here in Groton. So I know that you'll have appreciation. You'll come by. You'll have wonderful eats, and you'll see the work of some wonderful artists who are here in our community. So stretching out a little bit from this community right here in Groton to across the border into Westerly and South County in Rhode Island, I have an artist friend and a contributor to our program today who's going to chit-chat with us about what it's like to be an artist, what it's like to appreciate the beautiful ocean scenery we have here in Rhode Island and coastal Connecticut, and what brought her to this wonderful area. So welcome, Catherine.
Well, thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about who you are. You have a diverse background, which makes it kind of interesting. As I was telling you off camera, I started out in life as an urban planner in New York City, planning transportation projects. And so here I am doing TV and promoting arts and culture right in the coastal areas of New England. So let's hear a little bit about your story. What is it, your backstory?
These evolutions happen.
Yes.
I also started out in New York. I'm a Chicago native, but went to college in New York, and so my whole beginnings were about science and about becoming a pediatric nurse researcher. So I went to Columbia and got degrees from there, and I loved it. It was a wonderful time of being able to express myself in that way. I found that I was most drawn to things that were very maybe the word is intimate. I loved labor and delivery. I loved pediatrics. I loved working with that particular group because I thought it was such a sensitive and kind of basic and interesting time in their lives. That all developed, though. I moved to Providence, Rhode Island, with my husband about, I don't know, maybe almost 30 years ago.
Wow.
And was involved in Brown. And I had a little bit of time to kind of explore myself because my children were getting older. And I started taking art classes from all these wonderful RISD trained artists that are in the Providence area and others.
Right. Rhode Island School of Design.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I drive by the Rhode Island Watercolor Society all the time with, 4 little boys in the car, and I'd say, oh, when I have time, I really want to be an artist and really develop this side of myself. Both my parents did have some art background, but that isn't what we usually did. So it came to that time then, in about 2000, that I was able to actually begin to take classes. I took them at the Watercolor Society. I enjoyed the beginnings. I have some wonderful people that taught me. And I had some success with watercolor. But I found it didn't really touch my soul. So I just continued to explore this rich Rhode Island environment. I mean, you can learn anything in art here.
Yes.
And so then I began to explore, and I, at the same time, had a little space in my life, so I decided to study environmental studies at Brown.
Wow.
So in the effort to do this is all just a wonderful evolution. I met Gail Cohey, who was in charge of the Women's Center there, and she kind of gave me a little job as a proctor, and I got to help with the gallery there at the Women's Center at Brown. And I learned kind of the gallery side of things, which fascinated me. There's a whole world I had nothing to ever had anything to do with. And then I became a docent at the museum, RISD Museum, something that I'm so grateful to those people.
Right,
because they educated me.
Sure.
It was like 3 or 4 wonderful university level courses in art history, right? And art appreciation.
Right, right.
What a museum that is. Anybody who, wants to, I think artists, it's great that artists go and look at other art.
Oh yes, of course, you can learn from others.
You really do.
Absolutely.
Your brain, I think, learns in a way that you almost is unconscious.
Right, of course, of course. course.
And so, again, grateful to them. I'm still a sustaining docent with them, and I still appreciate all those women and everything that the museum did for me. But I took courses at RISD in advanced drawing and painting in their program, and one of the courses I took then was in encaustic, which is wax painting.
Wax painting, okay, that's something I'm unfamiliar with. Okay.
So
describe for us what that is.
So wax painting is very ancient, and actually is tied in with being a docent, because it is at least 4,000 years old. The people, and we still have evidence in paintings that were made with wax. And what we saw were if you ever go to the RISD Museum, I think the mummy and all the other art is still there in that room that I used to talk about with the school children. And what they did is that oftentimes, if someone died, they would not only mummify, generally well-to-do people this was, but they would also have someone do an image of their face. And there's some beautiful wax images of young men and others in that same room with the mummy.
Wow. And
I was so struck. First of all, they're just beautiful, and there's something about the wax that just it was like got me, and the fact that it was so old, that it survived longer than we don't know of any other art except for perhaps the caves in southern France, right, where we really see art that is that old. So it just struck me how exciting that was, and so an artist that is in Rhode Island, I want to give a nod to her, and I hope I say her name right, but her name is Taylene Batalon, I think it is, and she taught me encaustic there at Rhode Island in an evening class, or a weekend class. And so tying all this together, it was so exciting.
Right.
So I've always, and I think everyone kind of has certain landscapes, like you were talking about the beautiful water. I'm so drawn to water. But I'm also, and maybe others are, very drawn to very simple landscapes. The first time I ever landed in Phoenix and I saw that desert and those mountains, and at sunset, I just was struck. I'd never seen anything so beautiful in my life. And I love the Maine landscape. I like, and then I'll get to this, but I absolutely am also very struck by the very simple landscapes in Ireland. Those almost spiritual places in the western part of Ireland called the Burren, B-U-R-R-E-N. And all these things, kind of, it's just so wonderful. I feel so encouraged by the fact that I've had a chance to do all this. So what I found out eventually I did is when we were in Maine, I found another teacher, and these teachers are wonderful. Frederica Marshall teaches sumie, which is a Japanese brush painting. Have you ever heard of it?
No, I didn't.
So this Asian brush painting, of course, describing what I like everything as simple and stark. It's just my minimalist taste. And that too spoke to me. It's just simple things of nature, bamboo.
What is the wax made out of?
Well, the wax, to get back to the wax is just beeswax.
Just beeswax.
You could get it. I actually was trying to negotiate with one of the farmers in Westerly, because I was at a dinner one night. He was going to give me all of his leftover beeswax from his bees. But when in that state, it's all full of bee arms and legs.
Yes.
It's not clear and clean. So there's another step that perhaps I don't have time to do, which would be to clean it. So we buy it in bricks, sort of, and it's not cheap.
Right.
Melt it in a crock pot.
Melted in a crock pot.
If need be. Other people melt it different ways. And so then, I'm going to put all this together now. I take the Japanese paper, I take the sumie, watercolor, and brush strokes and Asian method. All these are simple things. And the watercolor background, and my environmental interests, and I kind of put it all together.
Interesting. So is there so when you touch your paintings, do you feel a texture?
Oh, yes.
Yes, okay.
And they're very hardy, except for, people will say, I don't want one of those, something's going to happen to it. But actually, they're fine. There's just a few things you have to do. If someone's going to has a house in Maine, for instance, that they don't heat in the winter, that's too cold for encaustic paintings.
Oh, okay.
So you can imagine they evolved in Egypt, not in Maine.
Yes, very hot desert.
And it was okay, as long as the only thing I think, there does come a temperature where you could make them melt.
Okay.
But you have to really make it a concerted effort to leave them in the back of your car in the sunshine on a day like today where it's almost 100 degrees out.
Yes, yes.
Then I think you can manage to do some damage to it. But otherwise, you put them on with layers. So you paint them with layers.
With a paintbrush?
You can use all different kinds of tools.
Oh, okay.
And that's sort of the fun of it too. You can use, a lot of encaustic painters use they use brushes, but they also, they can use things from their kitchen drawer in a way. You can use almost anything. And definitely, the kind of tools that you might use for oil painting, where you might just use different kinds of metal tools instead of using brushes. You can basically use anything. But between each layer, this is very important, you have to make sure to fuse it, as they call it.
Fuse it meaning?
And fuse it meaning you stick it very carefully both to the first canvas and then to each layer. So each layer, very thin layers of wax, and you build them up. And you can build them up with colors, and then you can take tools and cut back on them and show certain colors come back. You can remove some of it with heat. So people who do encaustic have blow torches, creme brulee or torches, hair dryers, and and little irons. I have a little iron that's about this big, and you can do certain parts of it. It's absolutely exciting. And it's when you do this kind of art, to me, I mean, I don't want to get a little too unusual about this, but it's so basic that it's almost like meditation. Like there's no big rules to it. I loved watercolor, but you really have to there's real rules you have to follow to have a successful watercolor in general. A traditional watercolor, like you might see of most people like Sargent or even Turner or something. You had to use a process. You had to, if you make a mistake, it's very hard to do anything about it. It's a very unforgiving process. Not that I don't love some of the results, and I did have some success with it, but I didn't find that it sort of fed my soul the way this does.
And what is it about it? Is it the fact that you play with it and
well, it also smells good. I mean, you have to keep the window open, but wax and everything about it is sort of, it's all your senses. So so there's that, and you could find quite a few excellent encaustic painters here in Rhode Island. So that's one of the things I do, but the thing that seems like I enjoy more than anything else, and is most of my newest work, is that I use these Japanese papers that I've learned about from Frederica Marshall and Susan Shaw, a Rhode Island person, and others. I took lessons and workshops from quite a few Asian painters. The papers are so interesting. They're so beautiful.
Is it rice paper?
Yeah, that's how you call it. But there's hundreds of types.
Within the category of rice paper, there are hundreds of types. Is the variation because of the different rice they use?
It's where they're made, and actually, there are other trees besides. It isn't really rice. There's many other different kinds of trees that they use, and some are very thin, some are heavier, some have speckles, and they were made in China, this way for many, many years. And it's a process that actually they're starting to have trouble, because China's changed so much, to find people that are manufacturing to the same standards of quality that in the past. They're having more and more trouble. There's certain places that people like me and others who do this kind of work go to certain Oriental art supply places, California, and there's actually one in Rhode Island. I can tell you about later, but I don't know her exact name. But these Asian papers are, it's so exciting, because then you can see how so then I mix the encaustic and the paper, and the ink, and I find I can come up with things that just really, it's what I was trying to say. And
it sounds very tactile.
It is.
Yeah, rather than some other canvas kind of thing.
It's kind of the opposite of fussy.
Okay.
I mean, when it is not like careful painting. It's not like most people really love a great representational painting. You know what I mean? Like someone
I can
draw
scene
a beautiful
person.
scene of Wickford,
Right.
and boy, they draw it in oil or in watercolor or in whatever they do, use pastel, and I really admire that. But somehow or other, I don't find that satisfying. And I feel that it's about abstraction and starting to have a strong feeling for the simple and the abstract, and that kind of came over time to me. And my husband last holiday time decided to buy me a book. My husband's a doctor, and has never understood what I was doing very well. He likes the representational things, but he gets a little embarrassed about some of the other things until other people like them and get juried into shows, and then all of a sudden he's like, oh, okay. But he bought me a book, and I hope you don't mind my mentioning it.
No, go
His
ahead.
name is Eric Kandel.
Okay.
And when I was a young nursing student at Columbia.
Pick it up so that the
so
camera
you can
can pick
see?
up the name.
Oh, let's see if I can
Yeah,
pick the
yeah,
name.
well, it's going to be, okay.
So it's reductionism and art and brain science. Now that sounds crazy,
It does.
but I'm going to tell you what it is all about.
Okay.
So reductionism just kind of means making things simple. He's a neurologist, and when I was a young student nurse in New York, working at what was then called Babies Hospital, I'd always hear Eric Kandel over you used to have speakers in hospitals,
Yes, right,
remember?
right, the PA
loudspeakers.
system, right.
I'd be, you didn't pay much attention, but I really do remember his name always being called. Maybe it's because he was a neurologist and the ER would call a neurologist if they had an accident or something like that
Sure.
to come and So it's just so funny how this all works. So my husband presents me with this book, didn't tell me he was going to do it. He heard about it on television, actually. And what this guy, Eric Kandel, who subsequently, by the way, has won a Nobel Prize in physiology.
Oh, wonderful.
I don't know anything more about him than that. But he's got interested in art.
Oh, interesting.
And he started explaining in his brain studies that art, in his mind, that becomes more and more simple. Of course, I'm going to like this because this is what I do.
Sure.
But is really getting towards sort of a almost core of our being in a way. That
Okay.
when somebody sees something that can sort of ring a bell with people,
Sure.
to put it another way, strike someone, uplift someone in a way that maybe other art can't, because we're almost representing our unconscious. That's his philosophy.
I see. Interesting. Because I'm sure that you learn. The brain is a wonderful organ, and you can continue to learn. And so the more you're exposed, like getting kids more exposed to things like art, gives them the opportunity to maybe get other brain cells.
I think that's
as visual kinds of stuff and spatial kinds of things. Just percolating and I think you can be older and still have that.
Absolutely. Anybody
Percolating in
can
your
do
brain
this.
and expanding and maybe helping those gray cells multiply.
And
I
it's
believe
also
that.
pleasurable. Ever since I got into this, I've almost not read anything but books about art, although I'm doing some others. But it can be a wonderful thing to focus your enthusiasm
Right.
at any age. The docents at RISD, by the way, take children around all the time from
Sure.
the state of Rhode Island, and I think it's just excellent for them to see things that maybe they've never even thought about
Sure.
before, and to not tell them what to think, but just expose them to them, see
Sure,
what they
give them
and
an
what they have.
environment, and then they can
say
come up,
amazing things.
Of course. The more innocent you are, the more sometimes seems like crazy stuff comes out of their mouths. But no, that's right. Because probably if you're into this brain stuff, then it would mean that a young brain that has not been exposed to this stuff is seeing things at its most minimalist kind of platform.
Certainly infants are probably saying things.
But even 5 and
Yeah.
10 and 20-year-olds, where their brains have not completely matured, they get exposed to this kind of stuff, and it opens up, fires up, and charges new cells.
I think that's
that
absolutely
might,
right.
in fact, be very positive.
I mean, so much of sometimes we do talk about, especially what I've been hearing lately about many artists in other areas, not just visual artists, but they were inspired by things that they had seen as children. It suddenly sparked the very best thing in them.
That's great.
And that's why I think, it's wonderful what RISD's doing. It's wonderful what all those art teachers probably in all the elementary schools in here in Rhode Island are doing, right?
Well, we hope so. We hope so. I'm a great proponent for having all schools be supported by having art and music teachers. That's important for a kid. It helps them grow, helps them get involved in other kinds of things. Art, my little granddaughter, who's just going to be 8, I'm going to go to her birthday party on Saturday. So she's interested in art. Yes, very much so. And she's she loves animals. So that's the key thing. She's always trying to draw animals. So I said, her mother should send her to art school. But her mother was a musician for many years. So, and that was very good because it allowed her to become someone who could play in a group, because she played in an orchestra, but then you have to practice by yourself.
So it's discipline.
Exactly.
And social skills.
And you don't necessarily have to have a linear life. So you can start learning a piece in the middle and then later get to the beginning. So it requires your mind to jump from places. You don't necessarily have to follow a straight line in learning music and becoming proficient in music. I would imagine in some way art can't be all that different than music. Maybe it's the different senses that it highlights.
No, I think it definitely does. And actually there's quite a few. I mean, I know more medical people because that's been my other history, but there's many medical people that are involved with the art associations in Rhode Island. They're photographers, and there's I could probably, after this is over, I could give you a whole list of them if you wanted to talk to them.
So my daughter, who studied music for all these years, actually is a pathologist.
Well, I'm not surprised. when I was involved with, and I was, not directly involved, but had involvement with the Brown Medical School. I don't know if you realize that they have, at least they did for many years, it diminishes it to call it a talent show, but it basically was a musical event where so many of those really capable medical students and residents would play music.
Right.
There's no accident, I don't think.
Exactly. So we have examples of your artwork. So I would like to see something, then you can explain it and describe it, and then how you came to do this particular piece. So this is the first one. I, being unfamiliar, we do see the horse or a pony or something that's like that. So tell me as a viewer, what does it mean?
Well, the evolution of it is, so what that is that's actually sumi-e, Japanese simple ink painting.
Okay.
Using soot, basically.
Soot,
ink.
Meaning like
very, very black ink.
Wow.
Which is a special ink that we use. You can buy it at the RISD store. I mean, you can buy it's available.
Yes.
And then we use Japanese brushes. And so that's just I love animals too.
Right.
And sometimes the key in my mind is to try to get the essence of something in this fewest possible strokes.
Okay.
So I felt successful in capturing the movement, and then I kind of wanted, I embedded that, by the way, into layers of wax.
Ah, okay.
And then there's a layer of wax over it that protects it, and then you can, that's something that's going to be actually in a show that the Art League of Rhode Island is going to have at the VA. I can't think of it all of a sudden, but the place where the music, the classical music is performed, the VA.
Oh, okay, all right.
Center. There will be a show there.
Okay.
But that in the show that accepted it, what they're at. So just to kind of give a sense of what it is that they were really talking about essential mark making, basically.
Oh, all right.
And so there is sort of, so that was something that they felt represented
it. So if I touch your painting, what will I feel?
You'll feel wax.
I will feel wax, but is it going to go up and down? No, it's going to be completely smooth?
In mine, I eventually make them smooth, because I think they're a little more attractive that way.
Okay.
But people embed, I don't do this, but they make almost collages, you know what I mean by a collage? And they'll embed things into the wax.
Okay.
That's not something I'm interested in, but they, but people that are fabric artists or textile might embed different kinds of, you can do a lot of different things with it.
So if I'm blind, right, and I'm touching this,
You're only going to feel wax.
I'm only going to feel
12 by 12 inches of wax.
Okay. All right. All right.
Interesting question.
Yes, yes. Well, I'm figuring, well, how am I going to promote all my senses when I see something like that? And it's a horse. Why a horse? Why not a goat?
No, it actually is a deer today.
Oh, a deer. Okay.
And it's out in by itself, and you know, it's going over a ridge, and you know, I think what I felt is that it kind of captured the simplicity, and you know, oftentimes you'll see a deer by themselves.
Yes, they
and
can
you know,
solitary.
I see them up in Maine.
Yes, well, you don't have to go far. They're in my backyard.
Yes. And you know, there's something solitary about them, and I don't know. I just felt that I'm impressed with their movement, and it just felt that it expressed to me maybe how they see things, which is not so clearly. And what is their experience? You know. So you know, it's kind of almost that simple.
And when did you do this? When was this done?
Oh, about a year and a half ago.
Oh, so it's recent, fairly recent.
Yeah, all three of these are going to be recent things that I've done. So it's definitely an evolution. You know, I'm so, you know, grateful for people who've taught me these different. This is like 3 or 4 different groups
techniques
of people who helped me learn all that.
So, so what you're looking to do is maybe fuse several different techniques. Am I wrong in saying that? Okay, yeah.
And I think that sometimes that is what, you know, art is, and also science is like that. Sometimes the greatest discoveries come from people putting 2 different ideas together.
Sure.
You know,
yeah, no,
meshing
absolutely.
things.
Yes.
And so it's more fun too. I don't know why it's more fun, but to me it's more fun. A lot of people don't necessarily understand it, but you know, some people do, and when people do, I'm so grateful.
Right, right. I could see that you would want to. I mean, many artists you see, it looks like they have one technique and that's the way it is. They may add color or different landscapes, but there is a certain sense of not rigidity, but this is the way it is. Where if you try to combine different kinds of techniques, you get something.
Paper and wax and ink.
It would be different. And I would think, because it requires infusing several techniques, that every single one would be different.
A lot of them are different, but people say I have a style. They can pick it off.
Okay,
so
that's great.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yes.
I really honestly don't play. You know, I'm fortunate not to feel like I have to produce a product that is necessarily what people want.
Right.
I'm very, like I said, I'm always very pleased when people like it.
Sure, but you have that independence.
But I do have the independence to do what I think is really coming from, you know, somewhere. Which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, let's see the next one.
Okay.
Because they look, so what is this one?
So what this is again, now this is Japanese paper essentially all by itself.
Okay.
If you touch this, you'd feel paper at the bottom there where you just see the white.
Okay.
But what I worked on with this is I was working, I love that ink because it's the darkest, deepest ink you can almost find.
Wow.
And I just found it so dramatic. And I love trees. And I've always been attracted to trees. Of course, many people are. They're so beautiful. But I kind of make this all kind of a very personal journey too, because I sign my art. Usually, in most cases, is signed Radix, R-A-D-I-X.
Okay.
And in Latin, that's root, like a root of a tree.
Right.
And so, you know, I like the image of a root because it's so, it's sort of where water and life all come together, and it just pleases me. And so I do a lot of trees, and that's also my name. And I also have a stamp. I use an Asian stamp on most of my paintings that has been made for me, which is root.
Okay.
That a person who makes these kinds of, you know how Asian paintings oftentimes will have those red marks on them up the side.
I'll have to remember to look for them.
You will, yeah.
Yes.
You'll see them, and
Yes.
sometimes they have many of them from not only the artists but the people who have owned it.
So I worked for a number of years for the China Institute in New York City.
You did.
And we used to put on 2 art shows a year.
Oh, you know what I'm talking about then.
So yeah, that's why I'm very curious. And we had Asian art, and we would have almost all of it was Asian art, and almost all of it was Chinese. So, but the Chinese and the Japanese always had this. Not only did they go to war with each other frequently enough, but they did have this tension about stuff. So, yours is definitely Chinese versus.
Well, that's a funny question.
Yes,
my Asian training in the beginning was up in Maine from Frederica Marshall, and she lived in Japan her whole childhood, and she studied art her whole life. And there she is up in this little house in Deer Isle, Maine, and she. I wanted to take that class because it wasn't available at the time at Rhode Island Watercolor Society, so we took a trip up there, and that's where it all started, where my spending a lot of time in Maine and studying with her. She's Japanese trained. Susan Shaw, who is here locally, and there's some other people in Rhode Island, are more Chinese trained.
Right.
But you know,
you maybe wouldn't know the difference, but there is. I mean, the people that I used to work with,
they were very sure that Chinese.
Oh yeah. Now they would hunt the world for Chinese art all over Asia. We would get paintings from Singapore and Malaysia, Australia, because wherever the Asians had migrated to. And we put them together, and they were extraordinarily expensive to mount, mostly because of the insurance costs.
Okay.
You know, some of these were priceless paintings. Fragile, and all kinds of import, export rules, and not tariffs, but all kinds of inspections. It was a laborious kind of thing to get some of these paintings into this country.
You know this, yeah.
But they were thousands of years old in terms of their art. It's been around forever. It defines who they are. Each emperor has his own kind of art, and
you can learn all this. It's so interesting. And also, if you watch, even if you're interested in antiques, it all is, related. You can learn about Chinese antiques and learn about Chinese painting and learn about all those different times.
A lot of it is and
Isn't
the
people
would do, as you like to do a little bit of other things, that was very, very common. And I always thought the blackness, now the blackness was with your ink, we were talking about that. The blackness also had to do with, I always thought, our depiction of Asians, so that they had the blackest of black hair. And some
maybe
of the,
so. Yeah.
Some of the attributes, and oftentimes when you talk about the gods in these particular kinds of religions, it's not the kind of religions that we understand, but there is this sense, especially among the Chinese, this worship of the ancestor and death. And I always, as an outsider not trained in art, I always associated death with the blackness in the use of lots and lots of stuff that they do, not only on rice paper, but much of it has this very, very blackness. And I always thought it was a reverence for death. So, I mean, that's my...
No, that's interesting. I've never actually heard that, but I think that's understandable.
And they also had all kinds of gods that were evil and good, and the evil ones always were darker. And so there was this sense that the darker you got, the blacker you got. It was like almost coming from your soul.
Yeah, well, I think that's basically, what attracted me to the whole effort. And the whole, also the calligraphy is a great training.
Oh yes,
So before both of my main teachers, before both his Chinese and Japanese, you will work on calligraphy, just a way to discipline and a way to sort of like doing scales and music. It's sort of a way to train your hand.
Oh yes, and a steadiness.
Yes.
And because again, I'm not an artist, and I'm not have a student of art, but the thickness of the brushstroke not only is part of the brush itself, but it's part of your hand motion.
Oh, absolutely.
So the eye-hand coordination to be able to do this stuff in such a beautiful. There's no mistake. I mean, with the things that you see in a museum, there's no mistakes there. That little bit of brushstroke, just a teeny bit, and then a little thicker along the side. That is incredible skill.
Yeah.
Because it's not just making a painting from from looking outside and making a landscape. It's where you can oftentimes fix up some mistakes. There's no forgiveness.
There's no forgiveness
in this kind of brush strokes.
The students are trained very, very carefully by their teachers, and they spend years and years doing the same simple things over and over again until they get them right. And when you're in art school in China, there's nothing wrong with imitating. In fact, you spend a lot of your time imitating and trying to duplicate great works, which is very different than the thinking here.
Right.
But it's all very. I just find it just so attractive, the whole discipline, and the whole. And again, something about what But both, especially my teacher up in Maine. I mean, she basically is a Buddhist. She never particularly talks about it, but her philosophy comes through with everything that we did, and it was just so pleasing to me to have that. It was what I needed to do at the time.
I get a sense that the stuff that most is attracted to you as an artist are things that are really ancient. I mean, the whole idea of wax that we're talking about. 5,000-year-old pyramids with the bodies underneath there, who have actually we can still look at them.
That's right. That's terribly important to me too. But I also, when I finish a work now, I think I'm trying to make it as simple as possible, as opposed to the opposite.
Okay.
I'm trying to get down to making things as simple as possible. The tree with that blue background, somehow or other, using the wax under the tree and the reflection, I don't know. I sometimes don't know exactly how what's going on, because I allow it just to happen.
Yes.
And I think that some of the most beautiful things can happen that way, because I think, sometimes I think we use our heads too much. And we talk too much and we write too much, and we aren't communicating very well, right?
Yes.
And so I think I can communicate better without words.
Okay. And then we have your third one that we have, which is also seemingly different than the others that we've seen.
But it isn't very different.
Okay.
Because what it is, and this was from last summer, no, not this summer, but last fall.
Okay.
I took a trip to Ireland, and I've always wanted to go to this particular part of Ireland, which is called the Burren, which is just a little bit south and, west of Galway.
All right.
We stayed in a place called Ballyvaughan, and it was just magical for about, I think it was 10 or 12 days. And I had two encaustic teachers, one from Ireland and one from Rochester, New York. And, we were off in this beautiful town, Irish town, where people were lovely. It was the Burren School for the Arts that we held it. And we took tours around, and I was absolutely struck by the landscape. It's glacial. It's, again, it's almost like, I said I love so much the desert and I love so much Maine, but this is like taking that all to an extreme. And it's interesting because we have all that glacial territory in southern Rhode Island, but there were glaciers that left a landscape that's just so simple. But it was so beautiful. It was almost like a mountain, but it was flat. No green. It was almost no green. So if you like, that's not the green part of Ireland.
Okay.
In fact, some people have told me that was the only part of Ireland they didn't like.
Yeah.
Because, it's all green and rolling elsewhere.
Yes.
But this is absolutely like, just, and people, the first time I ever heard about it was someone who was like a religious person who said that this was like a, very spiritually important place. That there's thin places, they say, in the world, and that this is one of the thin places. Well, that really intrigued me.
So stark, would you
simple.
Okay.
So simple, and it almost looks like a desert, but it's all, so often where you'll go through places that are just have almost all rock, limestone, but then there's these beautiful little wildflowers.
Okay.
And then what you'll find, because the people in Ireland, were there long before our history started. There were people there thousands of years. We don't know exactly, but they would build structures with those limestone pieces, beautiful ones. You've seen things that are in circles. The circles sometimes they make of rock.
I've been to Stonehenge a couple of times.
Stonehenge-like things, but they're all over this area of Ireland too. And then they make these that just intrigued me. It kind of looks like some sort of a religious altar, doesn't it?
Yes,
and
it does.
I just, I worked on how could I think that they were. And but it was just struck me so much, and so I found a way to try to express that. And this is not any particular one. It's just my image that came to me. And again, so what it is it's Asian paper.
Okay.
It's Asian watercolor, which is what the orange is, and it's wax. So I using a monoprint. You know what I mean when I say a monoprint? Sometimes you'll almost use a glass or a plexiglass or some sort of a piece, and you can paint on that piece.
Oh, okay.
And then you can put down a paper, and you lift it up, and it gives you something kind of beautiful. So that was I used monoprints in some way. I used the watercolor, and I used wax.
Is the
wax is the gray.
Is the orange sun? Is that what I'm looking at?
Yeah.
Is it sort of like on sunrise, sunset? You go and sacrifice hopefully not the humans, but maybe maybe an animal.
Yes, or some sacrifice of some sort. Yes. Hopefully no one had to lose their lives. But it's, I just felt like there was so much power in those areas, and I just want to express it. I also am Irish. And I actually...
do you come from that area of Ireland?
Well, I had never been there before, but I have grandmothers and great-grandparents who have the same name that I have, Catherine, and I went actually to the Aran Islands, which are a couple of islands that are off the Burn.
Okay.
And I actually saw tombstones with my family, Costello. Only they say a Costello. That's what I learned when I went there. And it was just very touching. So it was all good, and so I just loved to kind of express some of the emotion that I felt about that area. And everything wasn't always good in Ireland.
Certainly not.
And especially, I think, when my ancestors left.
Yes,
I think that it was during those bad times.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. But Ireland is an interesting place because you mentioned how old it is. And of course, long before Christianity was in Ireland, they had gods where there were human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, a very common. So yes, definitely a very, very old place that only became Christianized, well, maybe 1,000 years ago, and it has several thousand years of much more ancient history.
And supposedly, and I've been reading actually some Irish history too, but supposedly, St. Patrick, who was so well known there, actually was so wise in his ability to kind of reshape some of the thinking and gods that were already existing there, and kind of rework it to what he was telling people about Christianity.
Right, so they could accept it much more readily.
Which I think most cultures, that's
successful religions do that all the time. They just mold it around what they think the people will believe, and then over time they may make and reshape it in terms of what people
little
believe.
Adjustments.
Yes,
not all bad.
Yes, absolutely true.
So that's what that was, and I just wanted to give you, and I did a lot of work about that, sort of a series about Ireland. And there's some others with trees, and they are oftentimes they're images that come from the environmental thoughts that I sometimes have, feelings I have about what is going on here and what's going on in our culture.
Of course, yes, of course. That's what the art is supposed to do, is to kind of tame the beast in the rest of the world. Writers, poets, artists, absolutely. That's our job. Because in my other life, I write mystery novels.
Oh, really?
Under the name Anastasia Goodman. So absolutely, we have double lives, and that's part of what our...
How interesting.
Yeah, so we're supposed to tame the people, their crazinesses, and to make them maybe more human, more vulnerable. That's the whole that's a part of art anyway.
And I think that's, what this Eric Handel was trying to say too, is that, really good abstract art, in his opinion, evolves to a point where... like Jasper Johns, maybe, or my hero is John Marin. They try to make things simpler to the point where it's almost like when you're meditating, you have a word.
Yeah, mantra.
So that good abstract art almost gives you, it's almost like a mantra word.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's so simple that it simplifies things, and it's almost without words, which again,
And of course, then it allows for universality.
Yeah.
So that it's like you don't need the Tower of Babel. It's completely universal.
Right, because it seems like words just confuse us, don't they? Sometimes?
They do. So now also tell us about this wonderful group that you belong with.
Oh, I'm so excited to tell you about that, because
that is in Washington County in Rhode Island. And
right.
Tell us about this group.
So I think they started about 13 years ago. It was long before I lived in South County. And one artist
mm-hmm.
came, I think her name was Leah Greer, came to South County and Hopkinton specifically.
Which is a town in Rhode Island.
Right, and she wanted to, she wanted to get to know the other artists in the area, and there are a lot in South County, in that
mm-hmm.
particular very western part, in the very bottom of Rhode Island. And she wanted to get to know the others, and I think she went to actually to the local library in that area and got some support there, met a few other people, and she got started with what they call, and still are going to have this year, Hop Arts. And that means it refers to Hopkinton.
Not bunny rabbits?
Right. And so it extends, I think it's about a 7-mile trail.
Okay.
And it's going to be this year from October 13th to October 14th. 10 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock.
Is that Columbus weekend, or is that after?
I think it's after, which would be probably a good idea.
Yes.
And it's, what I have to say is I participated for the first time last year.
Okay.
It is such a beautiful road. And,
mm-hmm.
it's just a beautiful way to spend a fall weekend. And it's very easy to get there. You can take 95, and I'm going to be in Ashway at the very bottom.
Okay.
And then there'll be artists all the way up. There's usually about 28 or 30 artists involved, and they're all different, and they're all interesting. And in some cases, you'll see them right in their studios working. I'm going to try to demonstrate when I'm there in Ashway. I'll be with a couple of other artists in that Crandall building, but there are also going to be many people all the way up that are going to have, and if you want to get a brochure that describes each of the artists, they can get it at www.hoparts.org.
Right. So we'll say that again, www.hoparts.org.
Yeah.
And that is a nonprofit organization that sponsors this annually, and it has been doing it for quite
13 years, I think.
13 years, okay.
My only thing that I'm sad about is I can't go up and see everybody's work at the same time. I'll be where I'm going to be, but it's still a wonderful thing. And it's a great opportunity, I think, to see another side of these are artists that oftentimes don't get too much publicity.
Sure.
So you can really see some interesting people.
Is it juried, or how are
we had
selected?
to be elected into it.
Okay.
So we had to submit an application and submit our work,
mm-hmm.
and they choose people to be in it. So it is basically a juried
kind
organization.
of a juried show.
So but there will be as varied as jewelry people,
mm-hmm.
and a lot of some wood based artists and other painters, and I think there's some fabric artists, and I think you just a whole array of things, no matter what you're interested in.
Sure.
And it's a great chance to get a chance to talk to people. I love to talk to people who come in.
Sure.
because it's so interesting.
How many people do you think they get? A few thousand? A few hundred?
I you know what? I don't have a good answer to that.
Okay.
I want to try to guess. But I'm sure hundreds.
Okay.
But and then each place is marked along the trail.
Okay. So you literally get a little map, and
you do.
And it's
and if you start at one end or at any place, we'll give you a map to finish.
And at each stop, there'll be a single artist or multiple artists?
In most cases, I think there'll be multiple
artists.
But in some cases, you'll go into the studio or the big barn.
Sure.
This is beautiful territory.
Yes.
Of someone who's doing work on different kinds of scale. So and sometimes there'll be a cluster of people. There was one woman who I've seen in other places. I couldn't go to the Hop Arts Trail for obvious reasons, but she does beautiful leather work.
Mm-hmm.
There's some beautiful jewelers, do very original kinds of jewelry.
Do you, who is the board that makes the decisions about
Well, the person who's in charge of the board now is Marcy Redinger.
Okay.
She's president. And
okay.
then there's a whole board.
And then they
choose.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it then your desire to become one of those who chooses, so you can see what?
Yes.
You can then have a influence.
That's
on
a nice. It might come to that. It might come to that.
Yes.
That would be fun.
Yeah. So, and what caused them to get together? They just thought that.
Well, I think artists need the support of each other.
Okay.
I mean, I have a group that I meet with on a regular basis, and you encourage each other. You actually will paint, and then we'll critique each other's work. And that's the kind of thing that, there are different groups in Rhode Island.
Sure.
There are groups that go out and paint plein air,
right.
too. And then they'll judge the work, too. And, we need to hear those kinds of things. Sure. Other than submitting to juried shows, which is, to me, is the best thing, because then you have then you really know whether you've reached the right places or not, because
you're right on top there.
No one's going to pretend to be nice to you about that. You're either in or you're out.
Yes.
But I really learn a lot from my colleagues, and it's otherwise, art can be very lonely. You're alone up there. I mean, it's what I like, but it's also what I.
Well, you might say that the same thing about writers and poets.
Yes, I bet it is.
Yes.
See,
and we then also are attracted to groups. So in Connecticut, it's the Connecticut Authors and Publishers Association, which is a group of writers and poets. And then there's the Rhode Island, area, Association of Rhode Island Authors. Same idea, a few publishers, but mostly writers, mostly fiction, some nonfiction, a few poets thrown in there. And yes, definitely. So we need that feedback. And I meet many writers, and I, along the way, as a writer, developed by going to classes and also being critiqued not only by someone who's running the class, oftentimes by my colleagues in the class. Some people like things, sometimes they don't like things, and it becomes a good sounding board if you're going in the right direction, if you're reaching the audience the way you want to reach the audience. I always say, and I'm not a poet, but I always say poetry is like a lost unless it's actually heard by an audience. Then you can see their faces. Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they disinterested? So that you get some immediate feedback, and then you can use that immediate feedback to go ahead and
go back
some more. Like I find that particularly for poetry, that you go back and back and back. It's sort of a thing that you're never satisfied, and you're always reworking it. It's a little harder for novelists to do that. There's some of that goes on.
But you do rewrite, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. You're always editing, and sometimes, James Joyce is a perfect example. He was constantly re-editing his stuff after it was published, edition after edition. He still wanted to rewrite it. So there is that kind of compulsion to reach perfection, which
you can see some of James Joyce's original writing up in Dublin.
Oh, yes. Well, on June 16th, I organized a group in Westerly to Bloomsday, a celebration of June 16th, which is the day of the 24 hours in Leo Bloom's life. That is part of Ulysses. So we read sections of Ulysses. Terrific. And in Dublin, had you been there June 16th, you would have gone to public places and they would read in 24 hours the entire Ulysses. All 800
amazing.
Pages. They do it in Ireland, they do it in London, they do it in New York. So yes, and so that there's a character who actually left Ireland and never went back. Had enough of it, and that unfortunately is part of Irish history, is that they've created some great writers who then left and never came back.
Yeah.
Part of that could have been the British influence, but others is just there was not enough opportunity for people.
So somebody go to New York or wherever you have to go to be seen.
They had to leave. They had to go to Australia and New Zealand and every place else in the world and leave their homeland behind. Well, Catherine, this has been fun. Again, when is the Hop Arts?
So October 13th and 14th. which is a Saturday and a Sunday, starting at 10 o'clock until 4 o'clock, both of those days.
Great.
And I think it would be something to think seriously about, because it's going to be, I think it'll be very enjoyable.
www.hoparts.org, or go onto the website. You'll find all kinds of information about this wonderful opportunity to see artists working together, working in their studios, and we want to encourage people. We as an organization, SEC TV, we encourage artists of all kinds, particularly visual artists. As you may know from the history of the studio, we put on art shows every year. We're going to have one later on in the year. And we welcome the public to come to our art shows. Our two Franks who run this place, they have delicious food, and there's always good wine. So whenever you hear about us having an art show, you want to make it your business to put it on your calendar. So there'll be a lot more information about it. So I also want to tell you a little bit about what I've been doing. I have been trying to create literary salons from the 19th century concept of meeting together with writers and poets, sharing ideas, discussing their work. And so I have, with the great help of two local businesses in Westerly, in downtown Westerly, the Malted Barley and Tapped Apple Cidery and Winery. These are two local businesses who are our hosts for these events. So I have on the fourth Tuesday of every month a literary salon, Books and Brews we call it, at the Malted Barley, and we have writers there. Coming up September 5th, the first Wednesday of the month, we're going to have Poets Corner at the Tapped Apple Cidery and Winery, downtown Westerly, 37 High Street. Now, the wonderful thing we're going to do on September 5th, so everybody should put this on their calendar, this is a must, is that we're going to salute 9/11. And we're going to have expressions of that. We're going to have poets, and they're going to read their works of loss, perhaps of patriotism. And the crowning work that we're going to display is actually, we're going to have a story by a guy named Charlie Kellogg. Charlie is not a writer by trade or anything like that. He's actually a mortgage banker. But he has written what I call chilling, extraordinary, and it is called Falling Man. And I want you to all come out. Tell all your friends to come to the Tapped Apple September 5th at 7 o'clock. Hear the poets, but hear Charlie Kellogg's incredible Falling Man story. It will, I'm talking about it, I got goosebumps already. And then I will be there with my, in my other world, Anastasia Goodman, with the book The Terrorist, because that talks about the overreaching that our government did in terms of allowing torture by the government in terms of trying to interview terrorists. And so my anti-hero, Sasha Perloff, goes to Eastern Europe to interrogate a potential terrorist. And I, with great sadness, my hero just died, the man who stood among giants in his pursuit of the good values of Americans. And I'm speaking about Senator McCain, who was the only one in the U.S. Senate and the only politician to rise up against the idea of torture, that it was may be effective, we don't think it is, but more importantly, it was un-American. And so my character, Sasha Perloff, who is the son of a Soviet dissident who was tortured and imprisoned by the Soviet authorities, he goes to do this interrogation with the knowledge that he would under no circumstance torture someone. So you have to come September 5th as we kind of salute the people of 9/11. I was there in Manhattan on 9/11. My husband had the horror of actually watching from his office tower on the 48th Street in Manhattan as one of those towers went down. So he will be there also. And I'm telling you, this is, we need to take it, and as artists and writers and members of a community, we need to embrace this, not like politicians, but as something that is part of the core. They attacked us at our core, but as Americans, we need to remember who we are in terms of trying to ferret out our enemies. So again, I hope you come September 5th, 7 o'clock at the Tapped Apple Cidery and Winery. Delicious cider, apple cider and apple wine. You're not going to find that anywhere else. Bring your own food or eat dinner before, because he really doesn't have a menu. But it is fun to have cider and apple wine. September 5th, 7 o'clock, Tapped Apple. Hope to see you there. This is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer of Community Culture Showcase. See you again sometime soon.